Good morning and welcome to Blockchain Demystified, Toronto Finance International's third presentation in our Executive Speaker Series to connect academic audiences with industry leaders. I'm pleased to add that this is our first presentation within the series under our new organizational brand, Toronto Finance International. A couple of weeks ago, we changed to that name from Toronto Financial Services Alliance. But while our name has changed, our mandate remains very much the same: to drive the growth and competitiveness of the financial services sector and to lead the international promotion of the Toronto region as a global financial center. And talent is key to those objectives. So to that end, TFI leads and supports initiatives that advance the attraction, development, and retention of in-demand, world-class talent for the FS sector. The speaker series aims to explore important trends in financial services and their impact on talent needs in our sector to help inform and influence curriculum and programming in our post-secondary institutions. Now, some logistics before we launch into our discussion. Today's presentation is our first webinar-only event, the intent of which is to improve the sound quality and recording for remote participants. We'll also be recording this session, and fingers crossed, assuming the technology works, we'll be posting it on our TFI website. The format of today's session will be a half-hour panel discussion, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A, and then a wrap-up. For the Q&A component of our discussion, please use the chat function to ask questions. That chat function can also be used to raise any technical issues you may be having, which will be fielded by our on-site technicians, who will be monitoring the chat room for these kinds of questions. So let's get started with an introduction to our two panelists. Fahad Shaikh is the Director of Emerging Technology at CIBC. He's responsible for establishing strategic direction of emerging technologies and supporting the execution of blockchain initiatives within the bank. Additionally, he's responsible for partnerships with fintechs and keeping apprised of developments within the blockchain industry. Fahad has been involved in the execution of multiple projects, some of which are Bank of Canada's Project Jasper, the Ripple Cross-Border Payments Project, Utility Settlement Coin, and multiple R3 projects. Before becoming a director, Fahad served as a senior product manager in CIBC's Emerging Payment Solutions team. Fahad is a graduate of the University of Toronto in economics. Welcome, Fahad.
Thank you.
And we have Iliana Oris Valiente, certified Bitcoin professional, who's widely credited for being a trailblazer in the blockchain space, having been among the first to recognize the tremendous impact of this traditionally hacker technology on the enterprise world. Her focus has been on exponential technology, entrepreneurship, and bridging the gap between the corporate world and the startup communities. She's a managing director at Accenture Canada, running their Canadian blockchain practice and the newly appointed head of innovation. On the blockchain front, Iliana is responsible for strategic initiatives and overseeing projects to conceptualize and build blockchain solutions across industries, with a focus on financial services, supply chain, healthcare, and the public sector. Iliana is also the founder and chair of ColliderX, the world's first nonprofit, open-sourced, and crowdsourced R&D hub for blockchain and related technologies. Iliana has strong views on how the network effects of this technology will impact multiple verticals and how it will radically change many status quo business models. Iliana is an author and sought-after speaker, regularly presenting at conferences and events around the world. Congratulations, Iliana, on your new role, and welcome.
Thank you.
So thank you both for taking the time to join our discussion today. There's a lot of interest, information, and seemingly misinformation about blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies. And so to kick off our discussion, Iliana, would you please give us an overview or a primer of blockchain technology? One question I think we all have is blockchain synonymous with cryptocurrencies, or are these separate topics?
Mm-hmm. This is one of our favorite questions, I would wager to say, and absolutely two very distinct topics. In our work, we tend to focus on more of the enterprise applications versus the cryptocurrency piece, which, although interesting, is perhaps less relevant to this particular audience. The term blockchain, otherwise known as distributed ledger technology, is more of an umbrella term that encompasses multiple definitions, hence why it's often difficult to pin down just one answer. But if we were to attempt a very simple 30-second definition, don't time me please, it would be to call it a distributed set of ledgers that update in near real time when transactional information is being recorded. Now, multiple participants are able to write to this ledger and read from it. But what's unique in this configuration is that once transactional details are recorded, they cannot be unilaterally removed by one of the participants, unlike in traditional database structures. And so with that and complicated cryptography and consensus mechanisms and many other technology components that we will not go into detail on in today's call, this ledger provides a way for multiple parties to see the one version of the truth rather than having silos of information that then require reconciliation between those multiple stakeholders. And so think of this more as a technology shift, much in the same way that the introduction of the personal computer, the introduction of the internet, and the introduction of mobile changed the way that many business processes are set up and offered opportunities for entirely new sets of products and services to be created as well as a result. Would you add something else to that as well?
No, I think you hit it bang on. I think the only thing I'd like to add is ultimately just another take to your definition is just it's a group of computers working together to validate information that is being transmitted across the network. And so that's where you have the concept of a single source of truth, because everyone on the network is agreeing to that information before it's being stored on the actual blockchain itself.
I actually read an article this morning, a real use case of it. Walmart is implementing it within a year, that their suppliers will need to enter their data, I think for it's their fresh leafy vegetables, enter data so that end to end you can tell where that product came from. And so if there's a problem at the source, then within seconds they will know it and be able to pull it off the shelves. So thank you for that. Fahad, what are some examples of where blockchain technology is being used or can be used in financial services?
So blockchain in financial services is, because of the fundamental nature of blockchain, it can be used in a variety of areas. So payments is a great example of where blockchain can start to be used. Trade finance is a huge area of interest within financial services. So to your example of Walmart, that we're starting to see a lot of supply chains and that whole industry move towards a blockchain type of infrastructure. So a lot of what we're looking at is, well, what is the impact to financial services when you have a more transparent, more real-time supply chain? Can that start to impact the types of products and services we start to offer these types of businesses? Capital markets is a huge area that in terms of post-trade, life cycle activities, settlement, transparency of securities. And a fourth area that's very much emerging is just data management. So the idea of how you can actually share data in a very secure way using blockchain, or at the very least, data management policies on the blockchain to be able to avoid a lot of the breaches that a lot of companies tend to have.
The other financial services use case that I'm seeing growing interest in is in the syndicated lending space, and quite a few projects that are moving in that direction, including, I think, the LenderCom one with Financia that's quite interesting. And what are some, how would you describe the potential benefits of the technology for financial institutions? And I asked that on, I was reading another article this morning, and it was an interview, a Forbes interview with Tim and Adam Draper. And Tim Draper said, when asked the question, what did he anticipate and what did he not anticipate about blockchain? He said he did not anticipate that the regulators would put a dark cloud over all this innovation. He had hoped that there would be some clear, simple rules and they could get on with it. So that's kind of maybe
addressing the risk side of it, what are the benefits the potential benefits of this technology for financial institutions?
So I think there's two time horizons on the benefits of blockchain, especially within financial services. So I think in the short term, it's a lot of, I can categorize it as efficiency gains. So we're talking about cost efficiency, process efficiency, even system rationalization or system efficiency. So if you think in terms of payments, where if we implement a real-time payment rail, you can think of the capital cost efficiency, where we're not holding on to capital as long as we were before. In trade finance, when you have a more transparent supply chain, the overall risk of loan defaults goes down significantly. In capital markets, where they do large wholesale FX transactions, real-time payments, real-time settlements, again, reduces capital, increases efficiency. So in the short term, trying to understand how this technology fits within our current infrastructure will drive a lot of efficiency with it. And now the second time horizon is kind of the revenue generating time horizon. And the revenue generating time horizon tends to be more, I would say, pushed from the business industry itself. So the more applications we see with Walmart and supply chain, the more applications we see with regulators starting to use blockchain itself, will then have a shift towards how financial services provide products and services to these more, I would say, more digital-oriented types of businesses or industries.
And on the regulatory front, I actually think that there are two perspectives for the enterprise world and for more of the open source cryptocurrency financial services world, which I think is likely the one that Tim and Adam Draper were referring to in that particular article. But in my experience, and I'd love to hear your views on this as well, from the enterprise side of things, regulators have actually been quite open, because as they learn more about the technology, they recognize that there is significant opportunity for them. And if the market participants are moving in a certain direction, they want to understand what those trends are and how they might actually benefit from it. So if I was a regulator overseeing food safety, I would absolutely be interested in the adoption of blockchain technology to manage recalls. Whereas today it might take a couple of days for the organizations in that value chain to identify where something has gone off. Being able to do that in a much shorter period of time is de-risking it. And so most of the regulators that I've spoken to are very keen to be more involved.
Yeah, and I would echo those sentiments. Most of the regulators we've talked to really are interested in learning about the technology. And if you compare Canadian regulators to other regulators around the world, they've been more open-minded about the possibilities of how these technologies can be used. And I like in some cases, yes, they may not have policy that kind of puts a boundary on the technology, but that in itself allows it to flourish in ways that we couldn't even imagine at this point in time.
And when you have regulators and government groups who are actively investing in using the technology, it sends a really powerful signal to the rest of the market that although they may not be putting together parameters, and perhaps we should argue that that's not necessarily the right thing for them to be doing in the first place, but they're setting the right example to really drive that innovation agenda for the country.
Yeah, I agree. And in that same Walmart article, they talked about how despite few real announcements, blockchain has been a corporate buzzword this year, and that according to a PwC 2018 Global Blockchain Survey, which included 600 executives from 15 territories, 84% of them said their companies are actively involved in the technology. Are you seeing that in financial services? What do you see as the trend in our sector? Is it a parallel percentage of use or of interest?
I think of interest that feels about right. And you have this continuum where executives are interested in learning about the technology. Executives are going back to their organizations and identifying the possible use cases, then filtering through to building proof of concepts, building pilots, and eventually tipping towards production readiness. In the Canadian market, I would say that we're still in the first 3 to 4 pieces of that.
Yeah, and the financial services angle, a lot of it has to do with trying to understand how do you how do you integrate these new technologies with existing technologies and not have an impact to ultimately our clients? The analogy I like to give is, well, how do you make a Ferrari? If you hook up a trailer to a Ferrari, how do you make it all work, really? Right. And so that's what really the challenge within financial institution is we've got this very sound system that 99.9% of the time works. When you start to add newer technology with, again, unknown risks, things like that, then you've got to be a little bit slower in how you push that forward, because you have to look at it from a risk perspective.
Right. So that flows us nicely into the talent component of this. And so, Iliana, there's a lot of hype around blockchain. This is a US statistic, but CNBC Make It reported that in the US, there's been a 9-fold increase over the last 3 years in job postings related to Bitcoin in the financial services industry, according to LinkedIn's data. Anecdotally, are you seeing a similar trend in Canada? And how are companies handling the sharp increase in demand for talent?
The talent question. This is a really fun one. So in order to go from an idea to reality when it comes to incorporating blockchain into a set of business processes and actually driving value for an organization, you need all sorts of skill sets. It's the strategists, the people who understand the current business processes, those that can engage across an ecosystem. At the end of the day, and we were chatting about this morning, we know that blockchain will not be used to its full capacity if it's used within the four walls of one organization. And so as a result of it being a network technology, you need to be able to pick up the phone and act almost as a corporate matchmaker, if you will, to encourage other parties to come to the table. And then you get into more of the technology skill sets, the architects that understand the way that you would solution for an environment and a product when you're using more distributed technologies. And of course, the software developers that are familiar with the various blockchain platforms that are currently out in the market, the pros, the cons, and can actually build out your smart contract-based functionality. So you really need that broad spectrum of skills.
And is it out there? Are companies struggling to get this talent? Is it?
A lot of this has been grassroots, just based on the origins of where the technology came from. And one of the interesting observations over the course of the past year is that many organizations have grassroots teams that are already getting together for lunches and dinners on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And often when we're out speaking with our clients, I encourage the senior executives that we interact with to go and survey their internal workforce and ask, who is interested and who has actually been setting up experiments on their own time as a hobbyist because they're really interested in the technology. Take those individuals, harness their energy and enthusiasm, and you're already a couple of steps ahead when it comes to talent.
That preempted a question I was going to have for you that I was thinking about. This fall, TFI did a future skills research report in the spring, and it looked at what are the trends, given the trends happening in the sector, what are the skills that we're going to need over the next 3 to 5 years, and how do we get ready? So that was kind of the demand side of that research. This fall, we're doing the supply side and taking a look at how are we going to get those skills into our organizations. And we've decided to focus, because this is where our members told us to go, on the mid-career workforce. And so if you hear those trends, 20 to 40% of our workforce in financial services will likely be redundant given the pace of technology and where technology is going to go. How do we reskill? How do we upskill and reskill that workforce? And so I was thinking when I was studying up on blockchain for this session, do you think that that's a target talent source? And do you think that the existing skill sets in the industry lend themselves, are they transferable enough and lend themselves to this blockchain area? And it sounds like you think they do.
Absolutely. And I mean, we'll give you an example from personal experience. You can take a software developer that's just graduated from university and teach them all the fundamental skills that they need to become a blockchain developer. But that does not account for the time and being an experienced software developer. But experienced software blockchain developers do not yet exist. The technology has only been around for a couple of years. So what do you do in that instance? Well, what we've done very successfully is build out a series of training courses that we run internally for our staff, as well as for our clients, where we take our existing architects or existing software developers and we get them educated in all of the principles that are important for them to understand in order to function in the blockchain space. So that's just from the technology standpoint. From a business standpoint, you absolutely need people who understand the way that the world currently works. Financial services is not an easy industry to wrap your arms around if you have not spent a number of years in it. And it's a matter of encouraging people to be forward looking and recognizing that the way that things are currently done is likely to change. Those roles are not going anywhere, but the nature of those roles is going to change. And so it's more of a change management exercise, in my opinion, than purely training and skills development.
And within CIBC Innovation, we tend to talk about what we've termed the Model T development cycle. Mm-hmm. So there are your vertical and then there's your horizontal. Mm-hmm. So students, new hires tend to be on the vertical side of the T. And so they've got maybe a very vertical skill set in that they're blockchain or business or finance. And then you have the actual horizontal part of the T, which is the actual experience, how projects actually work within a bank, how to move things, how to actually get stuff done within a large corporation, all the committees, different teams you need to talk to. So depending on where you are within that development, it's that experience that mid-career type of worker is on more of the horizontal development. And so it's just a matter of refining their vertical development in a place that they're passionate about, where they want to spend the next 10, 15, 20 years of their career.
Right.
So we've developed a lot of strategies around how do we actually kind of promote that Model T development cycle.
I like that.
Yeah.
And let's flip it now, because I took the conversation off to mid-career workforce, but our audience today are the post-secondary educators, so of the early talent, of the graduates that are coming out of schools. So let's stay with this on this topic for a bit longer, and I really want to delve into it. What are the kinds of skills? So for these students who don't have the experience coming out of schools, what are the skills that they need? What would best prepare them for this field?
So we've hired quite a few students, and having kind of that overview, I would say a lot of it is multidisciplinary kind of exposure, right? So thinking about system design, right? So that's something that technically doesn't get a lot of focus on, but having students thinking about, well, what is a best-in-class system design? And more specific to blockchain, what is a decentralized, interconnected system look like, and the complexity related to that, because that's kind of the real problems that we're trying to look at right now is that, yeah, there's a concept of decentralized system design and then centralized system design, but then how do you kind of mash those up, and what's the best in class with that? I would say another skill set is around user experience and product development. The one thing lacking, especially in blockchain, is that user experience angle to things, where it's what's the client experience in approaching blockchain? And not just like an end user, but even a bank user, right? So banks are consumers of this technology. So how do you start to look at that from an enterprise product standpoint and to be able to show that? So having students have that level of understanding of how do you apply the theory to real world problems tends to be a real good focus, and design thinking mindset.
Yes.
So when in the bank, and Iliana can probably give a few more points about design thinking, it's about that ideating. How do you actually take a concept to an idea to real objectives to potentially production, commercializing an actual product? Because as a bank, our core business is not innovation, it is the commercialization of innovation. And so a lot of that skill set is how do you start to move that innovation cycle from actual idea to actual go-to-market product.
This is all new. There is no playbook. There is no university program that churns out blockchain developer grads and blockchain business folks who are also graduating from those programs. And so I think you're absolutely right when you talk about the multidisciplinary approach. but also openness to learn and openness to create. Part of the reason that we hire a number of new grads is the fresh perspective that they bring to the table. They have not seen the 15 years of how the system currently works. They're not constrained by that thinking, so they can come in and ask those questions. And so that facilitation design thinking skill set, critical thinking skill set, is absolutely very important for us to be hiring in, because these students are coming in, they're hitting the ground running, and oftentimes they're helping to carve out their own path as they go along.
And it also attests to the future leadership development. So bringing in new hires that have that design thinking mentality right from the get-go, as we become more of a digital economy, as we become more of a services economy, it's going to require a lot more of that idea to product mindset in a very quick fashion. So kind of having that mindset to be able to move through those cycles is of utmost importance.
As well as the broader innovation lens and understanding blockchain as a technology trend. What are other technology trends that are currently afoot? The move towards robotic process automation and broader artificial intelligence. Those trends are not happening in isolation. What's happening on the IoT side of things? How do all of these components ultimately play a part in re-architecting the business models for a lot of organizations?
So would you say then, that's great insights, I think, for our educators and for students. So would you say then it's the same kind of thing for mid-career professionals in the sense that because the courses aren't there en masse today, what you're really looking for are the business skills or the power skills or this, whatever you call it, those critical thinking. And you're looking for that and you're willing to train on the technical skills, whether it's for a mid-career workforce or your graduates. You're looking for this kind of, the kinds of skills that you're talking about, and you will train kind of blockchain specific skills. Is that what the trend, is that what
if post-secondary educational institutions could actually take some of that burden and do more of the technical training for the new grads, I'm sure that both of our organizations would be absolutely delighted. And so I don't know about you, but I know that I've gone and done some guest speaking at universities. I've been involved in creating the curriculum or reviewing the curriculum that has been incorporated in some university programs. And I think that's absolutely the way to go, because universities and colleges are able to reach far more students than any one organization is going to be able to do at a time. But we can certainly take those new graduates and help them understand what's happening within our organizations and teach all of the nuances that there's no way they're going to learn while still in a classroom setting.
Oh, I totally agree with that in terms of going back to that Model T kind of approach. I think where large corporations specialize is actually on the horizontal development. So providing any type of employee with variety of experiences, whether it be in different areas or in different groups. So we would look to kind of institutions to be able to look at more of the technical skill sets, core foundational skill sets, that then when we bring them into into enterprise, where we can give them the full horizontal experience.
One more point. A lot of educators, I think, are surprised to find how advanced their students are, even with the absence of formal programs. I have had, and I'm sure you've probably seen the same, people who are applying for jobs who are 16 years old, 17 years old, 18 years old. They haven't even made it to a post-secondary institution, but they've been coding since they were 12. They perhaps have done some unpaid internships at technology organizations. They are self-taught, and a lot of this material is available online. Much of the technology is completely open source, and that's actually become a way for us to filter candidates who have shown the initiative to go out on their own time to further their skill sets, recognizing that it might take the academic institutions a little bit longer, given their processes, to incorporate this into the curriculum.
And to just add that, and maybe a slight tangent, I'm starting to see more earlier recruitment cycles. So like even CIBC, we've got a partnership with the Knowledge Society, which
they're great.
which is a fantastic group of high school students that are doing some phenomenal work. So there was one student that actually gave a presentation where she actually created an augmented reality application for the CIBC mobile app of how to actually engage clients in a different way to reward them for their time spent within the app. And she was only 14 years old. And so that recruitment cycle, because of just the fact that the internet with all this information, we're starting to see there's a lot more, much earlier in the recruitment process.
When you see 16-year-olds that are creating computer brain interfaces, that's pretty impressive. Where, you know, if you're focusing, the car goes forward. If you stop focusing, the car stops moving. And at 16, they're being poached out of high school to go and work in Silicon Valley. And this one student, I thought this was a very insightful remark, said, well, maybe I should at least finish high school, because eventually when I go to apply for a visa to go to the States or any of that other administrative paperwork, that seems like a fairly basic requirement that if I don't check that box, I may not be able to progress further. Wow, okay, this is cool.
That leads me to another question that builds on a couple of points that you guys made. So you get this raw talent into the organization, whether it's coming from post-secondary or earlier, and you vetted for their kind of self-taught, exploring it on their own. We talk a lot about retention issues in the financial services sector, retention of this in-demand talent. What do you do so you get this talent, what do you do in your organizations to build their skill set further? So you get them in, and because that really, the development of this talent helps with retention. Anything that you're doing, Fahad, at CIBC to build their skills once you get them, or Iliana?
So a lot of, so it really depends on where they are. So like new hire grads come in, a lot of what our program is to give them a lot of exposure, is to get them to have an opinion of what it is that they want to concentrate on. What areas do they have passion about? And what projects do they want to actually start working with? So in the in the very early stages, you kind of put them into a lot of different situations, a lot of different avenues, and then you start to build kind of a core skill set within financial services. Storytelling is very important in terms of being able to sell an idea. So you start to work on kind of those soft skills of storytelling, presentation, public speaking, and then at the same time, and I can probably, most of our audience can attest to it, is research. And though everyone takes research for granted, research is actually a skill set. Not everyone can do it very well. And that's also something that we try to develop with new hires. Then as they start to develop an opinion of where they want to start to work on, what items that they want to concentrate on, we get an understanding of strengths and weaknesses. And then that's when you create kind of a multidisciplinary program around how you can start to feed their strengths and also kind of work on their weaknesses, whether that be through projects, training, even external training. And it's really, in my opinion, it's more of a science than an actual process around it. But then that's also where it's exciting, where a lot of people are starting to take ownership of their own development and how they want to drive themselves forward. Any thoughts on that?
Really similar process actually from the Accenture side of things. When we bring on completely new analysts, we have, A, we hire lots of them. B, we have some very structured programs where they get sent to our consulting school. They're learning all of the tools and the methodologies that they will be using within this environment, as well as access to industry-specific training. Because of course, we work across industries in financial services, public sector, supply chain, and so on and so forth. And so the students are getting that variety right out of the gate, and then they choose their focus area. Think of it as your major at school and your minor at school. And even while they're working on one project, they're perhaps participating in a +1 capacity, as we call it, on supporting proposals and other community outreach events and activities that help to round out their broader skill sets. And the feedback that we get from our new hires is extremely, extremely positive, because they are just exposed to so much in a very short period of time.
And do you find that you're getting buy-in at senior leadership levels for that kind of flexible development, talent development?
Yeah, for sure.
It's a core part of our business.
Yeah, and the talent acquisition, talent development is actually one of the strategic priorities within CIBC, where we're concentrating quite a lot on recruitment programs, development programs, and trying to, in a lot of financial services, we have a demographic that is retiring. They're starting to move out of the bank, and we're starting to have to fill those skills, and get people up to speed a lot quicker. So there's a huge internal focus on recruitment and development.
Let me ask you, we've talked about this, talked around it, but I want to ask now specifically, is blockchain just for technology grads? Are there opportunities for graduates of other programs, and what kind of roles would grads outside of technology programs apply for? Iliana, do you want to take a stab at that?
Absolutely. There are a number of roles. In fact, if we were to look at my personal experience, I'm a chartered accountant by training. And so I started my career in tax and audit and corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions. And fast forward, I stumbled into the blockchain space, fell down that rabbit hole, and realized that there was an opportunity to impact the audit business. And so I'm very involved with CPA Ontario, CPA Canada, helping to shape that strategy, but also impact across other industries. The hires that we've made on the team also come from a number of diverse skill sets. So absolutely you need your technical folks, and we have a couple of schools where we tend to hire from for that skill. But programs that are doing the blend of business and technology are pure gold, in my opinion, because you have these graduates that are flexible, and for a 6-week project, maybe they're working on a proof of concept and they are hands-on keyboard building. But in the next 6 weeks, they're actually helping to define the concept of what we're going to be building in the next proof of concept or in the next pilot. And they're equally equipped to speak the technology language as they are to interface with a client and run a series of interviews and understand from the stakeholder perspectives what's required. The other skill set that's really important is communications and marketing. And you'll see this in the blockchain space across the board where, especially in the startup community, most of the teams are very technology heavy. Brilliant teams, but when it comes to communicating their vision and their product and designing their product in a way that the user interface is easily accessible to a number of different users, that's where I see an acute shortage, and even branding, the number of companies out there that all have very similar sounding names that can be difficult to navigate at times.
Yeah, there's three main categories in terms of, and not just blockchain, but a lot of the emerging technology. So you've got a business lead, so someone who interacts with the actual business stakeholders, tries to communicate with them, identify, well, what are their strategic problems, and actually try to prioritize what some of those problems from an impact perspective is. Then you have a technical lead, and that technical lead, a lot of the responsibility is solution. So taking the inputs from that business lead about problems that the business is having and trying to convert that into a solution that uses some of these emerging technologies. And that could be a combination, or that could be one particular technology itself. And then the third category is, I would say, the actual developers, the actual engineers. So that's the core technology roles, where they're the ones that will actually build upon these business problems and the solution and actually create that value that we're starting to do. So in those categories, you can start to see that the skill sets are very broad, and that you've got core technology, you've got the intersection of business technology, and you've got business itself. Right? Because a lot of these technologies, you have to start looking at them, well, how do you apply problems to the technology and not necessarily use the technology to solve a problem? It's how do you apply something to the technology itself?
What I love about the answers, the insights that you're giving, is that they completely align with this future skills research that we did in the spring. So it's really validating. I was really excited to hear it. One more question, and then we're going to get to the audience for their Q&A. We talked a little bit about we need more courses in blockchain. It's a very new field. They are starting to be introduced in campuses across Canada. Student interest is very high. In addition, student clubs and associations are focused on blockchain. They're popping up on campuses. What are some resources or readings that you can help direct our educational leaders to that will help them support interested students? I know you talked about they self-learn, but what are some of the curated content that you have that you could share with them that you think would work?
Well, in the blockchain space specifically, I think the de facto publication is probably CoinDesk. And so if you're looking at the industry news and what's happening on both sides of the market, enterprise and otherwise, that's a great source. There are a couple of books on the subject. Don Tapscott wrote the Blockchain Revolution book. William Mugayar wrote the Business Blockchain. So those are great resources. Andreas Antonopoulos has written a number of books that go into some more of the technology depth and has a series of YouTube webinars that are a really, really great way to learn. There are also TED Talks on the subject that folks can listen to. And I would also suggest reading some of the original white papers on the subject, introducing Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency and Ethereum, as they end up being very good foundations to understand all of the derivative type of platforms and products that have been created that are used in more of the enterprise space. So that would be my short list.
And just to kind of add to that, so it's just I would say the application side of it. So kind of subscribing to industry kind of associations. So like the Global Treasurer just recently did a whole spread on what blockchain means to treasury functions, to corporate treasury. And so a lot of those trade groups tend to have a good focus on how to apply the technology to their business sets. I personally go to the Bank of Canada. So the Bank of Canada has a working research group where they have some phenomenal research papers on the application of blockchain on a scale such as the Bank of Canada. So they released a white paper, I think last year, about the concept of central bank digital currency, but interest-based central bank digital currency. So they're looking at all of the implications on, well, if we did create a central bank digital currency, what is the greater impact to the economy? Like how do we create an economy where we've got physical cash and digital cash coexist with each other, and what are the complexities around it? So those would be phenomenal resources to be able to try to bridge the gap of application and theory.
And then speaking of the Bank of Canada example, Accenture is just polishing the final report for Project Jasper, the latest phase that we've been working on with them. And so that would be available in the next couple of months and could be a good resource for this group.
Thank you for that. And for the audience, we are, as I mentioned at the outset, going to have this webinar on our website. So you will be able to look at it again if you want to list to those resources, because I think they're really, really important and really useful. Let's go now to the Q&A for the audience. And we have a question. What are the specific technical skills that students need? What are you hiring for on the technical side?
So we look at like API development. We look at typically the blockchain, the languages like Solidity, things like that. And then also system design. So the how to structure a decentralized system and around the technical skills. Like API development is huge in terms of Angular, Node.js, so React. So a lot of the technical skills related to that.
Web 3.0 would be the broadest category, I think, for those technical skill sets. Some of the greatest success we've had are people who have a strong Java background, tend to really grasp the new programming languages like Solidity fairly quickly.
Okay. And how do interested students stand out from the crowd? What advice should career advisors and faculty give to students?
Follow their interests. All of the students that we have hired into our team are building side projects, have participated in open source communities, and they're not doing this because they have to, but they're doing this because they're interested. And it's a really great way of filtering candidates and helping to match them to the types of projects that we have in our pipeline that they're going to find really interesting. And so if a student in their spare time is programming an Arduino device and really interested in the IoT side of things, and of course we'll pull them into the agricultural blockchain IoT project.
And it's the same sentiment, it's the passion. So looking at people that are involved in hackathons, they're taking that extra time to start to understand these technologies and apply them, right? So that's the biggest thing, where it's not just a theory based, but they're looking at side projects, trying to understand and actually apply them to real life problems.
Hackathons are great.
Yeah.
If you see students at 2:00 in the morning and they're still sitting there with their coffee and coding away and they're a pleasant human to chat to, great recruiting signal.
Let's do this. What is the ratio of different types of professionals required? The example is strategists requiring the soft skill versus the hardcore developers.
It's about 50-50, I would say. Right now, in the early stages for organizations that are just getting stood up, the focus is on strategy. Because if you don't know what it is that you're building, running POCs is a bit of a futile exercise, because what is a proof of concept? You're mapping out a number of hypotheses, and then you're testing against those hypotheses. And much of the technology actually does work. We've done enough of that POC and pilot work to help our clients skip some of that early stage work and instead focus on what are the business problems that you're trying to solve, while in parallel making sure that we're developing the technology skills so that when need to call those folks, they are ready to go.
Yeah, and I think that's it's that development curve. So right now, a lot of the work on is application. Where can we apply this technology? How can we start to use it for an impact? So I would say the emphasis is more on the business strategy, but not in isolation. So there is a technical component to understanding. And then the idea is as you get more applications, as it becomes more mainstream, as you start to see a number of applications, that's where you start to see the growth on the technology side. And a lot of what we're trying to do is understand, well, what skill sets are needed on the technology side to be able to augment legacy systems and new systems, right? And because that's a very specialty skill set. So it's also about trying to understand how do we develop the technology side to be able to grow in that way as well.
And one more thing to add, we've been talking primarily on the enterprise side of things and what's required for a large corporation in terms of skill sets. But as organizations wrap their minds around this and create a strategy, we also see a parallel work stream where the core technology is continuing to evolve and the open source communities are very active and the core blockchain platforms are continuing to roll out new products and features. And so the academics on the line today likely have a number of students who may not be interested in working in the enterprise side of things. And that is totally okay. Perhaps they're interested in helping to build the next generation of blockchain infrastructure, in which case those technical skills are absolutely paramount, as are technical research skills. So in my other capacity with Collider X, we're actually promoting more technical research and development in the blockchain space, recognizing that it's not one field, but you have this blend of mathematics and computer science and distributed systems design, and someone somewhere needs to be mapping out those academic concepts and then actually doing that research that could ultimately be given to the chief technology officer or the CIO at an enterprise level, and that would help inform some of their thinking. So for those on the line, if you do have students that are interested in more of that research area, that is going to be of growing interest in the coming years.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Like CIBC is building out more and more academic partnerships to be able to kind of stay on that cutting edge of that research. So it's not just about looking at, well, what's going to happen in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years, but potentially what's looking at the horizon of 10 years, right? So a lot of like I was talking to a student who was talking about consensus algorithms and how they'll actually impact as hardware matures, as the complexity of AI matures, all those algorithms will start to get more complicated and sophisticated, right? So it's trying to understand, okay, next 10 years, what's also coming.
And we have, for instance, at Accenture, our team in the labs. And the labs is where we do most of our technical R&D. That's where the insights that feed into patent filings go. And that's where we tend to hire the master's and PhD graduates in some of the most technical disciplines out there.
That is great. Thank you. And can you elaborate more on use cases for blockchain in the supply chain environment or in supply chain environments?
Absolutely. So I can take that one. The supply chain is one of the areas that is growing arguably the fastest within our practice. We're also seeing the rise of what are called consortia, industry players coming together in a group recognizing the network effects of blockchain technology. So I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. One is Mobi. the Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative. You have many of the world's largest automakers, including, in no particular order, Ford, General Motors, BMW, Renault, who have all come together recognizing that supply chain in the auto sector is important. Vehicle identification is really important. Usage-based insurance is really important, as is connected car payments. None of those four areas are particularly a competitive advantage for any one organization. Because when you fast forward a couple of years down the road, no pun intended, when two cars are driving down the same road and they're passing a toll bridge and they're able to pay for their toll automatically in a digital fashion, what are the types of standards that are going to be required for that ecosystem in order for this to all function? And so MOBI is one of the groups that's both creating the standards as well as running a number of working groups where supply chain is going to be one of the biggest pillars. Supply chain also works in the broader product space. And so we've been doing work in the ocean shipping world in concert with AB InBev, APL, Kuehne+Nagel, and a customs agency in Europe to significantly reduce the amount of paperwork that's required to get a product from one side of the world to the other side of the world. So those are just two examples of what we're seeing in the supply chain space. But really, most products at some point in time need to go from point A to point B. And then when it gets really interesting is when the supply chain starts to intersect with more of the financial services products, i.e. the innovation happening in the trade finance side of things.
Yeah, and I was recently in Calgary talking to some of our clients in the oil and gas, and they're looking at blockchain significantly on how to actually move physical barrels and the whole settlement. A process that takes 14 days. A client had told me they had done a blockchain project where they actually, with the transparency, being able to track the barrel, which may require 14 different companies or distributors, they were able to shorten the settlement time from 14 days to 2 days.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's a lot of work even within oil and gas, within music is also a huge area where they're doing a lot of work. I know we don't tend to think of music and supply chain together, but if you look at it objectively, there is a supply chain within music that blockchain is also being applied to as well.
Absolutely.
Is it correct to say the blockchain initiative is appropriate for students in technology programs with interest in business rather than business students with little technical background?
We need both. Yeah, we need both.
I can say from the bank's perspective, like we've got different recruitment programs where it's technology students or business students, and the ones, and so irrespective of where they're coming from, the ones that do the best are the ones that can understand both, so that they can apply the actual business concepts to technology. Now, maybe your strength is technology than business or business more than technology, but it's that intersection of how do you actually apply concepts together.
There's also no right answer. It really depends on the students and what they're interested in. I was having a discussion with someone on the team just yesterday in the evening, and he's one of those rare folks that's equally competent on the software development as he is on the business side of things. And he was asking, well, should I be spending the next couple of years more focused on the technology piece or more focused on the business piece? But A, you don't have to choose. And B, choose whichever one you're more interested in, because either way, you have a unique balance of those two worlds.
And I think even more broadly, I think technology historically has been looked at as a tool to support business. I think increasingly technology is business. And so it's looking at it from that mindset that having those types of students is really important.
And there's a difference, I think, even in the language we use. Technology does not equal IT, right? And I think a lot of students have that misconception. But many of the projects that we're working on are at the intersection of an industry and technology. It's retail technology. It's healthcare technology. It's fashion technology.
Iliana mentioned grassroots activities. How do students and faculty get into these grassroots projects or discussions on blockchain?
I think a quick Google search. And so when we look at University of Waterloo as an example, they have a very strong history in the blockchain community, partly because one of the founders of the Ethereum protocol, most notably, was a dropout of the University of Waterloo. And earlier this year, I'm losing track of the months here, Waterloo hosted the biggest Ethereum hackathon in the world, ETH Waterloo, and they attracted thousands of participants. And so I think that the educators on the line, if they were to just do a quick search of School X and blockchain, they would likely find a student group somewhere that's exploring it.
We have a question. What is the percentage of businesses now exploring or developing blockchain technology in their companies?
I would say it's quite high. I think it's shifted a little bit from maybe in the last year or two, where it was just the core focus was a siloed blockchain. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of businesses are trying to approach just emerging technologies. So how do you use a facet of blockchain to promote something? How do you use IoT? How does IoT and blockchain fit together? How does AI, IoT, and blockchain fit together? So a lot of this is kind of approaching it, I would say, in that way, everyone should be looking at it. Blockchain specifically, I think in financial services, it's huge. I can't speak to other areas, but I know every single bank in Canada has their own blockchain team and their own blockchain business development team. I don't know, and other industries, I'm assuming, are the same, where blockchain has that huge impact.
There's been tremendous growth, and let me give you a quick rundown over the past couple of years and what I've seen. 2014, no bank wanted to talk about it because it was too risky and no one wanted to land on the front page of the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail as bank so-and-so is exploring blockchain or cryptocurrencies. 2015, organizations primarily in financial services said, maybe there's something here that's of relevance to us. Let us go explore this in more detail. 2016 was the year of the early prototype, primarily commissioned, I would say, by the CIO or the CTO of an organization, partly because the technology orgs needed to get comfortable and understand what this was and what this wasn't and how it worked. 2017 is the year that more business stakeholders started to get involved across the board in defining the what is it that we're going to be building, complete with can we please work on creating a proof of value and the business case. It's not going to be the most detailed business case down to your umpteenth assumption, but at least needs to be indicative of whether or not it makes sense for an organization or a group of organizations to make investments to explore this new frontier. And in 2018, we've seen the shift towards more of that pilot mentality with a couple of things that have actually tipped and are now production grade. But the production grade ones are still fewer in numbers given the relative newness of the technology, not because the technology cannot support it, but simply because the business use cases haven't fully caught up to what the technology could do. Now, the maturity in terms of industries varies quite greatly, and I still have many conversations that are at the blockchain 101 level or the blockchain 201 level, and some that are starting to move towards 301 and 401. And yesterday, for instance, we hosted at our new Accenture offices 23 chief information officers from a number of organizations. And even within that group, you had some folks who had already done some experiments in-house and others who had read a series of articles, were generally up to speed, and now we're interested in getting a perspective of how do we make this real rather than purely the theory. And so the maturity really does depend on where in that life cycle an organization happens to be, and also depends on the industry.
This has been such a fascinating discussion, and we are just about on the hour. So thank you. You really have demystified this topic, at least for me. It's been fantastic. Audience, I hope that it was of value to you. And as I mentioned, we will have this webinar available on our website so that you can review it and share it with others. Thank you so much, Iliana and Fahad, for joining us. You've been excellent, excellent presenters. Thank you, audience, for joining.